Joining us here now on the Rich Eisen Show on Wednesday, because there's a lot of news going on right now. Why not? Tom Pelissero, my colleague from the NFL Network, NFL Media Group, and he's going to dazzle you with his information and the rest of the insiders on NFL Plus and NFL Network later on today. How are you, Tom?
Doing well, Rich. We're in week 3, and I feel like, the past 48 hours has been one of those explosions that we get a few times a year where it seems like everything is happening at once. And away we go into the season here.
Well, and it's an unfortunate cadence through the first 2 weeks. Monday Night Football, shocking season-ending injury to star player. That Super Bowl hopeful puts a lot of their eggs in that person's basket. Aaron Rodgers, week 1. Nick Chubb, week 2. We were wondering in week 1 if it was a career ender for Aaron Rodgers. You heard from Rodgers post-surgery that he intends to keep playing, it appears, if not speed bridging his way back in January. Nick Chubb, what can you tell us about the injury that he suffered on Monday night as we're sitting here Wednesday? Any extra news on that, Tom?
Well, obviously, Rich, when you see the replays, and even if you avoided the more gruesome ones that apparently the international audience got, you knew that it was a bad injury. The question really is whether or not he had a full dislocation or a partial dislocation. Either way, you're talking about not playing for the rest of the season, and that's just a matter of kind of what is the road back going to look like. To my knowledge, he's not yet undergone the surgery, and there's always some parts that in the surgery they sort of make some of those determinations, and so we'll continue to stay tuned. It's obviously a horrific injury, and for the Browns, who certainly Nick Chubb is a big part of what they do. They had to, I don't want to say scramble, because you always have contingency plans, but they had to figure out what they wanted to do. They definitely were, checking around on who potentially might be available. But ultimately, within the past hour here, they were able to sign Kareem Hunt to a new deal. It's 1 year, up to $4 million, a guy who knows that system very well. He scored a bunch of touchdowns for him over the past 4 years here. It still sounds like Jerome Ford is going to get a big part of the workload, which I'm sure is good news for everybody playing fantasy football who blew their entire free agent budget on him in the past 48 hours here. But Kareem Hunt is, a guy who they think can step right in. And so he came in, worked out for him on Tuesday. He had a bunch of opportunities. He had a handful of different offers over the past couple of months here. Just was waiting for the right opportunity. There was no way you could foresee that it would involve this, Kareem Hunt going back to a team that, remember, he requested a trade from at one point. Wanted his contract upgraded, didn't happen. Goes into free agency, waited it out, and now here it is. The big opportunity comes right back there in Cleveland.
Yeah, and now he's, as they say, plug and play, and Cleveland no doubt will plug him in against Tennessee in one of those, paint swapping affairs. I'm sure he will get some touches right there. What about Jonathan Taylor? That was a first blush thought. Obviously, he's got 2 more games left until he can return. But what about Jonathan Taylor?
Here's what I would tell you, Rich, right now about Jonathan Taylor. He's in the building every day doing his rehab work. From what I've been told, he looks really good doing that rehab work. He may not be 100% right now, but certainly he's getting really close to being ready to be back on the field. His trade request has stood for over a month now. The Colts asking price has not changed. And there is certainly a scenario where Jonathan Taylor is back in a Colts uniform come week 5. Now, I would anticipate that, we're right now, as we're talking here, we're about 11 days out from his PUP stint potentially coming to an end. So I would think this next week here is where, if there's going to be any action on the trade front, this is where it would happen. You certainly understand where Jonathan Taylor does not want to play for the low number he's on this year. Maybe at some point there's a possibility of a bridge deal that could happen, that could bring him back and get him a raise and get him a little bit more security to get back onto the field. Those are all conversations you're going to have. And, as we've seen, if anybody was going to do it, you'd think the Cleveland Browns with $34 million in cap space and losing Nick Chubb might have had an interest there. From what I understand, that was not the direction that they were looking at this point. They like what they have in Jerome Ford. They've obviously got another guy they like in Kareem Hunt. Does somebody else step up to the table here? It might take an injury for that type of an offer, both financially and in terms of trade compensation, to come about. But what I can tell you is I fully anticipate we're going to see Jonathan Taylor back on the field at some point in the near future here. And there is a possibility that is back with the Colts.
Well, you could make the case, Tom, just, supposing from afar as we are right now, although you are the NFL insider here, that the timing wasn't right for the Browns. They needed someone right now. They could not wait even 11 more days for his pup to expire or wonder what he's like physically. Like they needed somebody now, and they have a plug and play in Kareem Hunt. I'm just thinking back to about a month ago when the Colts pulled the plug on the we're going to trade Jonathan Taylor, or you have the opportunity to be traded Jonathan Taylor part of our summer. The Dolphins and the Packers were the ones interested, one that we were supposing, one that we were surprised by. I couldn't imagine they'd be interested in him right now. Maybe the Packers, depending on how Aaron Jones is feeling, but right? I mean, don't you think those takers would be gone in terms of what his trade market looks like right now, Tom?
Well, even the Packers, I mean, I believe that Ian Rappaport reported, our colleague, that the offer from the Packers was something like 2 mid-round picks. And my understanding was it was nowhere close to what the asking price was going to be for the Colts. If you're Brian Gutekunst and you're looking at that situation, you're going, hey, if he's going to be available for relatively cheap, yeah, why wouldn't we be in on a really good football player? But the Colts have wanted upwards of the Christian McCaffrey compensation. So you're talking about a first-round pick or the equivalent of a first-round pick. It's a hard sell. I mean, in Miami, Raheem Mostert's off to a really good start this season. They obviously got a little bit banged up with Savon Ahmed getting nicked last week. They're kind of getting Devon Achane involved as well. If there's an injury, again, certainly they may come back to the table. But what's been really interesting about Miami, because they've been connected to, I think, every running back that's been available, like the entire offseason, they never really made that top of the market type of offer to Dalvin Cook. They never really made that type of, compelling offer the Colts would have taken to move Jonathan Taylor. Mike McDaniel comes from San Francisco, and obviously the 49ers have the highest paid running back in the NFL, Christian McCaffrey, right now, but they've also used a lot of different backs. Scheme matters to a team like the Miami Dolphins, and they feel like they've got guys who can run that scheme really well.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. We were a few days away from the Jets taking the field against the Patriots in a huge Week 3 game. Patriots 0-2, Jets licking their wounds with the Cowboys beating up on Zach Wilson and making it feel like it's 2022 all over again. What's your reporting on what the Jets are doing with that quarterback room that appears to be a second straight week of status quo post-Rodgers blowing out his Achilles?
I'm glad you asked that, Rich, because like every time I turn on the TV, all I see is debate about should they trade for Kirk Cousins, should they call Tom Brady. I would tell you this, what the Jets saw the first 3 quarters of that game last week in Dallas against maybe the best player in the game, Micah Parsons, and maybe the best defense in the entire NFL, was not all bad from Zach Wilson. He made some plays. He was relatively efficient. He was executing things the way that they wanted to see him in terms of getting through his progressions. Again, dealing with all the pressure. I mean, when Micah Parsons is living in your lap, it's hard for any quarterback to function. The 3 interceptions all came once you're down 3 touchdowns. He's trying to make things happen. Yeah, could he change the decisions or make a better throw on some of those? Absolutely. But you really got into a game scenario there where it got away from him. What the Jets have to do right now, and the viewpoint that they're taking, is the offensive line's got to play better. Again, you're not going to see a lot of fronts, a lot of pass rushers like Micah Parsons, but the offensive line has to play better. They got to give Zach Wilson time, and they got to get the run game going. That's it. Now, maybe we're in a different place. If we're come week 8 and the Jets are still alive, they're 5-3 or whatever, then maybe you're talking about going and getting a quarterback. But I don't sense right now that they're sitting there going, there's somebody out there who's going to be this huge upgrade. I mean, even Kirk Cousins, and again, we're way into the hypothetical realm here, Rich, but Kirk Cousins is on a team with the Vikings. It's 0-2, a lot of season left, coming off a 13-4 season. He has a no trade clause. There's no telling, would he want to go anyplace else? Would he even allow a deal to happen anyplace else? And if you're the Vikings that just paid Danielle Hunter $20 million to come back for this year, you've got Justin Jefferson, another one of the best players in the game. You've got a team that you think could be competitive. You're not looking after 0-2 to go, well, that's it. We're going to get roll with Jaron Hall or Nick Mullins or whatever. Again, maybe things change down the line here, but we're still really early in this process. Let's see what Zach Wilson does this week, again, against the Patriots defense that causes all kinds of challenges, and they aim to confuse the quarterback, and they want to take away what you do well. Let's see how they react in this game where maybe you're not quite into that same type of shootout, lopsided game mode like they were last week.
I hear you, Tom, and I appreciate the clear-eyed, calm, clear-headed
I'm trying to
approach.
balance you out.
No, Tom. I
counterbalance.
So no, and I appreciate that. And my question wasn't so much about Zach Wilson because short of the Jets petitioning the NFL to shorten games to just 3 quarters, They have to ride it out with him. And I appreciate you saying they got to get their run game going. That is a Nathaniel Hackett question to answer Breece Hall with his 4 football emojis that he X'd out and then literally X'd out by deleting it. I'm talking about the Zach Wilson decision-making where he winds up in a blue tent and then Tim Boyle's out on the field against Bill Belichick. Good luck to the gangrene then. So why aren't the Jets, maybe have they not kicked the tires on any veteran that's ATC right now to come in and learn the system in case they're the ones that they have to turn to by week 8 because there aren't any other quarterbacks on the market and the Jets aren't ready to win the Super Bowl because of what Zach Wilson has done over the first 8 weeks? You see where I'm going with this, Tom? Why just sit tight with the room as it currently is?
The depth thing is certainly a question. One of the options went off the table when the Rams promoted Brett Rippon to the 53. Not that that's going to be somebody you're anticipating stepping in,
right.
But at least he's been with Hackett. He knows the system. I mean, look who's available out there right now. And this is not to cast aspersions on any of these guys, but from the Jets' point of view, Zach Wilson's the former number 2 overall.
No,
pick.
I get it. I'm not talking again. I'm not talking about supplanting Zach now.
Right.
You have to,
right? But think about the makeup of the room, though. If you go sign Joe Flacco, you sign Carson Wentz, you trade for Case Keenum.
Foles is the one.
I don't know if Nick wants to play anymore, but if he did,
okay.
That'd be another thing that's out there.
Good to know.
Dalton. There's a bunch of guys who potentially could be out there. The moment you bring that guy in, and this is not about Jets fans, Rich, but you also know that the back page headlines and what's chanted in the stadium, if Zach Wilson throws 1 interception, is going to be for Andy Dalton or whoever it is. There is a level, and I'm not saying this, nobody's told me this with the Jets, but I would just say from a quarterback room perspective, when you've got a young quarterback, especially one who's in this type of spotlight with this type of team, and you're trying to bring the best out of him, not bringing in somebody that lends this idea that, hey, were you going to go to this guy? Well, at what point are you going to Flacco? It seems to me, again, just my opinion, from the outside looking in, that they are trying to give Zach Wilson every show of support, not just verbally, but in terms of what they do, that, hey, we believe in you. We're not panicking. We're not going out and getting somebody else. If they lose these next couple, we might be having a totally different conversation, Rich. But I think that there's a little bit of that here where you're just looking and saying, okay, we can't have any signs that we are panicking because that's going to have a negative impact on the quarterback who are just trying to believe in himself as much as we're saying we believe in him.
Tom, I'm having Zach Taylor on a Zoom in about 20-something minutes time. What do you think he's going to tell me about Burrow?
I would imagine with Zach, he'll do what he did when I interviewed him on NFL Network at, I think it was Back Together Saturday, where he just kept saying the same thing over and over with a smile on his face. Zach is not a big timeline guy. He had a bad experience with that back in his first season with A.J. Green. He's really never touched timelines in the past. What I would tell you about Joe Burrow is that, yeah, there was absolutely, significant concern coming out of that game when he's using that hyperized device on the sideline, when he's grimacing the way he was and limping. When you've got these calf injuries, they can be long-term, and either you rest them or you try to push through them. And if you try to push through them, you could be like Aaron Rodgers back in, I want to say it was 2014, where he had a calf injury like the whole year. By the time they got to the NFC Championship game, it's the game where they were up like 16-0 on the Seahawks. Seahawks roared all the way back, fake punt and all that. Rodgers that day couldn't even get up on his tiptoes. That's how much the calf deteriorated throughout the course of the season. And so that impacts your play calling and everything else. So for the Bengals, you get a week 7 bye. The thing you have to work through here is, do you rest him? Do you say we're sitting you down for 4 games? We're going to try to get a month of this and then bring you back? Or on the flip side, since you already tried the rest thing for 4 weeks and then he came back and the calf is still an issue, do you say, let's just try to push through it for the next 4 weeks, then get you a little bit of rest surrounding the bye there and hope that improves things? From Joe Burrow's perspective, or I should say, from what people have seen with Joe Burrow, he is feeling better. Past couple of days, I was told he was in the building for a workout yesterday. We'll see how this plays out. They got the extra day with the Monday night game here. But absolutely, I would say that his status is a question mark at this point, and the Bengals are going to have to make some decisions because Joe Burrow himself is probably always going to say he can play. The Bengals, with the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, are going to have some decisions.
Well, I guess the wrong time to test out to whether your calf can survive running from Myles Garrett and then the Ravens defense is Aaron Donald. I mean, that's a rough test, one would say. on Monday Night Football? I don't know what the options are. It's Jake Browning, right? That's who it would be, if not.
They have Jake Browning, who's never completed an NFL pass, and they have Will Grier, who I also think has not completed an NFL pass. He's played well in preseason.
Yes, he has.
The preseason finale after the Cowboys traded for Trey Lance, they still cut him, ends up on the Bengals practice squad. Yeah, it would seem to be Jake Browning. Browning's been around. He was out of the University of Washington. You can go back, Rich. Jake Browning was a Heisman. He was like top 10 in Heisman balloting. I want to say it was his freshman or sophomore year at Washington. Nobody remembers this because he ended up going undrafted. He had some injuries and he kind of became completely forgotten. But they always liked him in Minnesota. He's just kind of a gamer. He can sling it around a little bit. He beat out Trevor Siemian in training camp here. He's not Joe Burrow. Not many guys are Joe Burrow. Technically, only one guy is Joe Burrow. But Jake Browning's there for a reason. They think, if they had to play a game, that he could go out there and do it. All
right, I know you're up against it. My usual way out the door with you is, what do you got in your notebook you want to talk about? We're not talking about enough. Your 2 cents on that subject, Tom. What do you have?
Let's talk about the Panthers, Rich, and Bryce Young, because I think that a lot, if you didn't completely turn off that game and go over to the other one on Monday night, I think that the Panthers' offensive performance definitely raised some questions, if not concerns, just about how it looks right now. I mean, it's rare that you have a new head coach like Frank Reich, his second game, and is already facing post-game press conference questions about giving up play calling. And they do have a bright young offensive coordinator in Thomas Brown. If Frank Reich at some point decides to turn it over to Thomas Brown, that wouldn't totally shock me during the course of the season. But they're not there yet, especially on a short week. To me, and just, talking to some people around the league, it does look like right now Bryce Young is swimming a little bit in that offense. Obviously, he's a guy with a really high capacity. He's a fast processor. He doesn't wear a wristband on the field. He can repeat things really well. None of that's an issue. But for whatever reason, you look a lot of times, they're snapping the ball with just a second or two on the play clock. It looks a little bit panicked. He's not able to just go play. And the beauty of Bryce Young at Alabama was he was a guy, you watched him, and everything was so instinctual. Everything was just this free flow, and he just went out and played. It doesn't look like that right now. They had receiver injuries in training camp. He missed a bunch of reps. I think that a big part of it is, and this is not just about the coaches, it's everyone. It's the offensive line play. It's the consistency with the wide receivers. He needs some help. Bryce Young needs some help around him. I think you'll see that incrementally get better here in the coming weeks. But that's definitely, considering he's the number 1 overall pick, that's something to keep an eye on. Meanwhile, the other rookie quarterbacks, real quick, Rich.
Yeah, go ahead.
In Houston, every week from talking to people there, you're seeing him get a little bit better. How about Tank Dell, who you look really smart if, like me, you drafted him in a fantasy league, because everybody, when you go through Texans camp, was like, that guy's open on literally every single snap. He got 10 targets last week. The little guy from Houston, he's got potential to be a really good player here. And you're going to see C.J. Stroud. There's a lot of challenges on that team. The Texans have a long way to go personnel-wise, but you're seeing growth right now from C.J. Stroud. And then Anthony Richardson, obviously, in the concussion protocol, he's got to find ways at times to minimize that contact. You talk about Zach Wilson and the decision-making. Same thing with Anthony Richardson. I mean, he's a quarterback who's built like a tight end. We know he can take on the contact. There absolutely have been flashes in these games, as much when he's running it as throwing it, where you go, that's what Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen saw. That's why they took that guy number 4, because the potential is off the charts. But first game, bangs his knee. Second game, ends up in the concussion protocol. He's going to have to protect himself a little bit here, but make no mistake, the Colts are really excited about what they've seen from him when he's able to stay on the field.
You think he'll be ready for at Baltimore, Anthony Richardson? Obviously, it's still early in the week. What do you think?
Yeah, the concussion protocol, has several different steps. Usually you can tell based upon what the practice participation is listed as through the week. So if Wednesday, Thursday, he's a non-participant, he's probably not going to make it, because you got to go gradual. You got to come back to limited. Then they examine you, make sure your brain's functioning well. Then you go to full. They see how your body and your brain is functioning here. So if those steps don't accelerate in the next, let's call it 48 hours here, Rich, then he's not going to make it. If we see him out on the practice field, on Thursday, because he's not going to practice today, if he gets out there tomorrow, then maybe there's still that slim hope. But I would not, the average for quarterbacks for anybody is 1 game missed for a concussion. At this point, I wouldn't hold my breath, but we'll see. It's all guided by doctors, not by the team.
Right, and last one for you. You talked about Frank Reich giving up play calling potentially. They're not there yet. Mike McCarthy took it on. And 2 weeks in, I mean, he's going to be my guest on Friday's show, Tom. So far, so good, right? I mean, the points are a palooza, and it seems in rhythm in the same way that we were talking about. Obviously, you got a rookie quarterback in Bryce and somebody like Dak. They look to be fully loaded right now. What do you think?
Rhythm is the key word there, Rich. You nailed it, because Kellen Moore's a really bright offensive mind. He's very creative. He came up, playing for and coaching with Scott Linehan, who basically brought the spread offense to the NFL 20 years ago and is all about spread it out, vertical routes, get the football down the field. Well, when you talk about Dak Prescott, he's had a lot of success doing that over the course of his career. But at the same time, when you talk about interceptions, some of that comes when you're trying to push the ball down the field a lot. Mike McCarthy comes from a West Coast background, came up under Paul Hackett, Nathaniel's dad, in Kansas City and San Francisco, and then obviously in Green Bay. So he's all about the rhythm passing game. It's about getting easy throws for the quarterback. It's going to be slants. It's going to be getting the ball out of his hand quickly. Also getting the ball into space, getting it to the perimeter. But it's not all a vertical type of offense. When you've got a defense like the Cowboys have, you don't want to call it ball control, because I think people think that means running it 50 times. When you simply just don't give the football away and you get your quarterback in rhythm, that's going to give you the opportunity then to just control the game, let your defense rest a little bit, and then come out there and do what we've seen them do. I don't know that we've seen Dak Prescott have to put up a lot of points so far this season based upon who they've played and the style of games, and that probably doesn't change this week either. But this style of football is what Dallas is built to do. So on a personal level, I'm happy for Mike just because I know how excited he is, how much he loves calling plays. This is a big part of what he's done. He told me years ago that, after 1 year, he gave it up to one of his assistants, Tom Clements, and then took it back in December. And he told me that following year, I'm never giving play calling up again. In a different spot in Dallas because Kellen Moore was there. Obviously, the Jones family loves Kellen. Dak was comfortable with him. And Mike, to his credit, said, you know what? I'm going to try to embrace this. Well, a few years later now, he goes, all right, it made sense for everybody to move on. Kellen had a great opportunity with the Chargers. Mike had the opportunity to do something that he loves. And finally, just asking about this, Rich, he even last year, for the past couple of years, was still showing up like 7 hours early to the stadium. I'd be in Dallas getting there, on your show game day morning, 5 hours before. And Mike would be like, you here yet? He'd come out and see me. He's got nothing to do because he was just in there. He'd normally be in his play calling sheet together. Now he's actually got things to do when he's at the stadium. So he's excited about it. And the Cowboys, I mean, to me, they look like one of the most dangerous teams in the NFL, right?
Yeah, taking on the Arizona Cardinals in Week 3. Tom, thanks for the time. NFL Insiders on NFL Plus and NFL Network with Tom Pelissero and also the rest of the gang. Thanks for the time here, Tom.
Thanks, Rich.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.